Rising rapper Rahim Grant was hard at work on taking his music career to the next level when he crosses paths with one of his biggest fans, a girl by the name of Ciera Harp. It wasn't long before Ciera and Rahim are an item and expecting a baby together. However, the relationship quickly swirls down the drain, leaving Rahim and Ciera struggling to establish a harmonious co-parenting relationship. Except, one of them won't live to see their daughter grow up. Hello and welcome to The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, author of suspense novels about the dark side of love. And this week I'm putting a spotlight on the case I'm calling Murder in the Spotlight. Rahim Grant was born on March 30th, 1989 in Fayetteville, Georgia, to Geraldine Grant Bryson. According to his mother, from practically the womb, her son was laser-focused on making music. He learned how to play the drums and was even a contestant on the popular TV show Showtime at the Apollo at the young age of 7. Little Rahim, who dubbed himself the educational rapper, did whatever it took to shine a spotlight on his rhymes, playing countless schools and community events, spreading an inspirational message to kids that they should stay in school and focus on being the best that they could be. But as the teenage years dawned, Rahim became enamored with the gangster rap genre and completely changed his focus, adopting the stage name of Red Beezy and shifting his lyrics to reflect his new attitude. Besides changing his rap style, he threw himself into learning everything he could about producing and engineering, wanting to be more than just a pretty face behind the microphone. Rahim was determined to become a force to be reckoned with in the music industry. Rahim's hard work and dedication pays off as he makes a name for himself around Atlanta, eventually opening for such A-list acts as Ludacris and playing shows alongside such luminaries as Goody Mob and Master P. So clearly, Rahim is headed for big things. And it was in the midst of all of this crazy, amazing success that in 2013, he crossed paths with a devoted fan by the name of Ciera Harp. Born on New Year's Day 1989, Ciera, like Rahim, was a Georgia native. She was also a big fan of Rahim's music, and after attending some of his concerts, she saw an opportunity to parlay her love of Rahim's music into a working relationship. Ciera approaches Rahim and tells him she'd love to promote him and his music to local clubs around Atlanta. Rahim says, cool, let's do it, and he hires Ciera to help him get some gigs around town. Well, I don't know how many gigs she got him, but in a very short amount of time, she scored herself a gig as mother of Rahim's unborn baby. Yes, 2 months, 2 whole months after Ciera and Rahim meet, she's pregnant. And so, on November 20th, 2014, Ciera and Rahim welcome a little girl they name Angel. By all accounts, Rahim is a totally hands-on, very present, very engaged, totally dedicated father, very much in love with his little girl. Ciera, he's not so much in love with her because, in fact, he only views Ciera as Angel's mother. No more, no less. Ciera, on the other hand, believes that they are a happy little family. Well, this is going to cause problems. Despite being such a devoted father, music is far from being on the back burner. And in December of 2017, Rahim is prepping for a national year-long tour, which could really put him over the top in terms of his career. And Rahim is determined to achieve success beyond his wildest dreams. One reason that Rahim is so driven? His mother Geraldine told Snapped that her son would often tell her that he wasn't going to make it to the age of 25. December 29th, 2017. It's 10:50 p.m. A 911 call comes into the Clayton County, Georgia dispatch. It's Rahim and Ciera's neighbor, and she tells the 911 operator that a hysterical, bleeding Ciera has just banged on her door and that she has little Angel with her. 28-year-old Ciera has been stabbed multiple times, and she's screaming that she is afraid that Rahim is coming after her. Authorities head to the apartment complex and enter Rahim and Ciera's apartment. They find a bloody Rahim on the floor, half of his body in the bathroom, half in the bedroom. He's dead. Rahim Grant is 28 years old. The crime scene is horrific. There's blood smeared across the walls, on the floor, and investigators find 7 shell casings in the apartment, as well as a bloody serrated knife and a cell phone. They also find a .380 pistol at the neighbor's house, and all of these things are logged into evidence. Whatever the story is here, it's a gruesome one. To find out what happened, investigators head next door to talk to Ciera, but it's practically useless because Ciera is just off the rails. John Gosart, investigator with the Clayton County DA's office, told Snapped that Ciera was, quote, combative, that she didn't want anyone touching her, talking to her, and that she was completely hysterical. She has multiple stab wounds in her legs and is bleeding pretty badly. On top of that, she is more lit than 10 firecrackers, as in her blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. So clearly she is in no kind of shape to provide any kind of insight into what happened to Rahim. And because her injuries are so bad, she is rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery. Because investigators can't get much out of Ciera, according to what prosecutor John Fowler told Snapped, quote, it was difficult to see the truth about what happened. About the most that investigators were able to piece together from talking to the neighbor is that Ciera and Rahim got into a violent altercation, and according to what Ciera has told the neighbor, she was defending herself against Rahim. But as prosecutor John Fowler told Snapped, rushing to judgment doesn't solve a murder, saying, quote, you never want to assume anything about a victim or a defendant. Just because someone has a persona, looks a certain way, has certain tattoos, is affiliated with any other people, you never assume anything about them. Sean Joyner, attorney for Rahim's family, echoes this, telling Snapped, quote, we almost assume that the male is the aggressor and that the female is the victim. So while investigators don't want to assume anything, it is looking like it's a pretty clear case of self-defense. They say as much to Rahim's mother, Geraldine, when they bring her in to interview her. Well, Geraldine says, not so fast. Let me drop a little knowledge here. And she goes on to tell them that her son and Ciera were far from a love story, saying that in essence, Ciera was a groupie who was, quote, obsessed with Rahim's success. Geraldine casts further doubt on the story she's being told about her son being the aggressor, the instigator, in what happened, by saying that her son typically shied away from conflict, that he wasn't violent, and that when he got angry about something, his MO was to walk away, not to throw gasoline on the fire. Now that investigators have a little more intel, they are even more determined to talk to Ciera to get her side of the story. Except she's still in the hospital following her surgery and under heavy sedation, so talking to her will have to wait. Meanwhile, Rahim's autopsy is completed and it tells its own side of the story. Rahim was shot 7 times, including 1 shot to his head. He also had 4 superficial stab wounds. And although 7 shots seems like a lot, investigator John Gosart tells Snapped, quote, I wouldn't classify anything as overkill in a self-defense scenario. So without either of the 2 people who were in the room unable to say what happened, investigators have to continue to work the evidence in order to get the truth. Specifically, the bullet wound to Rahim's head, the top of his head, gives them something to chew on. So do the stab wounds, because Ciera left out that detail in her initial account of what had happened. Finally, on January 4th, 6 days after Rahim was killed, Ciera has been released from the hospital and she is ready to tell investigators what happened. Ciera says that she and Rahim were home and that she was cooking dinner and that Rahim was on edge, that he had been drinking, and that he took 3 Xanax, which that seems like a lot, frankly. Ciera says that whenever Rahim took Xanax, she knew to be, quote, on guard, because according to her, this would trigger violent episodes from Rahim, and that he had been physically abusive towards her for years. According to Ciera, Rahim then demanded she go into another room because he had some business to take care of. And that's when she noticed that there was another girl in the apartment, a friend of Rahim's from the gym named Elise Jones, who was sitting, I guess, on the couch in the living room. Now, does this sound weird to you? Because it sounds weird to me. Ciera says she's cooking. She's in the kitchen cooking, which I would assume it's an apartment, that it's near the living room. And wouldn't you notice a random girl sitting in the living room? Like, I don't know. It was weird. At any rate, investigators perk up when they hear that there is someone else in the apartment, because now there's a potential witness to what happened that night. Now, Ciera claims that Rahim had on some music and that he was telling her, Ciera, something, and she told him she couldn't hear him because the music was too loud. but I thought he was supposed to be conducting business with this random girl, Elise Jones. Okay, well, according to Ciera, her telling Rahim that she couldn't hear him triggered him to come storming into wherever she was. And in retaliation against her saying that she couldn't hear him, this causes Rahim to let loose a string of slaps, punches, and hits against Ciera. Okay, so apparently Ciera is known to just randomly walk around with a knife strapped to her ankle, which it turns out to be the serrated knife that investigators found at the scene. But again, she has this knife strapped to her ankle while she's home cooking. And according to Ciera, during the course of this fight between her and Rahim, this knife falls out of the holster, which seems like a pretty crappy holster to me, and that Rahim sees the knife, picks it up, and starts stabbing her, all while Ciera is screaming for this girl, Elise Jones, to help her. So in the middle of this vicious attack, this girl, Elise Jones, says, "Peace out, I'm leaving," and walks out the door, which that sounds logical to me, that you would see this and just say, you know what, I'm not sticking around. So this girl, Elise Jones, has abandoned poor defenseless Ciera, who is continuing to fend off this brutal attack from an enraged, hopped up on Xanax Rahim. She says blood is pouring down her face into her eyes, blinding her. And it's while she's in this state, she says, that she grabs for the gun, the .380, that Rahim just happens to keep on his person at all times. And she starts to blindly and erratically fire shots at him, saying, quote, "I couldn't see anything. I just started shooting." Ciera claimed she had no idea whether or not any of her shots hit Rahim, just that he had stopped coming at her. She said in that instant, she grabbed her daughter and ran for the front door, and that the next thing she knew, she woke up in the hospital. Well, that is quite a story, and that's the problem. It sounds like a story. For one glaring, painfully obvious reason that this sounds completely fakakta is that the evidence does not in any way support what Ciera is saying. For one, Rahim was stabbed multiple times. So how does she explain that? Well, this is the fly in the ointment. Ciera says she has no explanation because she didn't stab him, that he probably stabbed himself. I mean, as one does. The second thing that doesn't jibe with this story that Ciera is telling is that the bullet wound to the top of Rahim's head suggests that he was laying face down on the floor when that shot happened, which means he could not have been coming at her, attacking her. Someone would have had to have been aiming specifically at him, not shooting at him blindly and erratically. Ciera, however, sticks to her story that she has no idea how Rahim was stabbed. She has no idea how the bullet wound wound up on the top of Rahim's head, that the only thing she was focused on in that moment was scooping up her daughter and getting out of the apartment. Well, while this sounds like what it is, which is cuckoo clock, investigators still can't quite rule out the self-defense theory. Investigator John Gossart tells Snap that the bullet wound at the top of Rahim's head and the blood evidence found at the scene always nagged at him, saying, quote, "It takes thousands of puzzle pieces to put together a puzzle. I only needed one at that point. And that one piece of the puzzle showed me what she was saying wasn't true." I am with you on that one, sir. So while none of what Ciera is saying adds up to common sense on anybody's planet, it's not enough to arrest her. So investigators have to let her go. They turn their attention to this girl, Elise Jones, who it turns out is a real person. Who knew? She was at the apartment that night, and I can honestly say I did not have her being a real person, and B, being at the apartment on my bingo card. But at any rate, Elise Jones tells investigators that she did indeed come to the apartment, but that it was wholly uncomfortable, that the vibe between Rahim and Ciera was way, way off. Elise says the couple went into the back bedroom and her spidey sense told her they were about to have a fight. And at that point, she's like, "I'm not sticking around for this. I'm going to bounce." Elise Jones sends a text message to Rahim at 10:26 p.m. and says, "Peace, I'm out." And less than half an hour after that text, Rahim would be dead. Elise stresses she didn't hear any talk about guns or knives. She didn't hear or see Ciera and Rahim fight. She heard and saw nothing. Well, now investigators have to go back to Ciera because she's looking like a liar. But first they have to try to corroborate Ciera's claims that Rahim used to beat her up on the regular, except they can't. So typically in domestic violence situations, somebody knows something. They've seen something, they've heard something. There's usually a trail of some kind, except there aren't any instances of police coming to the apartment, no police reports filed, no friends and neighbors saying that they heard and saw things on a regular basis. Nothing. Turns out, Ciera does have a long history of violence and telling stories, going back to childhood. And as a child, she did not follow the rules, she skipped school, she got into fights. Her ex-boyfriend, D. Smith, told Snap Ciera, quote, always kept a knife on her. Ciera said she had been kicked out of school because she had stabbed another girl over a guy. Ladies, not that serious. Do not stab another girl over a guy, please. Just don't do it. Other stories in her repertoire. She claimed to have been molested by a neighbor, by a relative. There were claims that a teacher had been inappropriate with her. However, time and time again, everything Ciera said was proven to be false. D. Smith, again, that's Ciera's ex, he said he had even tried to warn Rahim about Ciera, saying and snapped that he told Rahim, quote, you just don't understand what you're dealing with. You're dancing with the devil. She's going to get you hurt if she doesn't do something to you herself. While there isn't any evidence of domestic violence between the couple, investigators do stumble into something quite interesting, something that changes the entire trajectory of the investigation. They learn that Ciera had recently relinquished custody of Angel to Rahim, as in she had signed paperwork saying, I give up my rights, I'm giving you full custody, you're in charge. Well, that is curious, isn't it? Investigators go back to Rahim's mother, Geraldine, for help filling in the blanks, and she says that Rahim was in the process of finalizing the custody arrangement when Ciera, who was not living with Rahim, came to him with a sob story about losing her job and her roommate was kicking her out, and on and on and on. And so, in order to keep the waters calm until the custody arrangement was finalized, Rahim allowed Ciera to move in with him. In the midst of all this, Rahim was getting ready for his tour, and this seemed to really trigger Ciera. So my 2 cents is that she was panicking that he was leaving. He was going to be gone for a year. And she finagled her way into the apartment with a poor me routine, and she probably had some other tricks up her sleeve to try and derail him from going on tour, to try to get him to stay, to try to get her hooks back into him. But I'm guessing that whatever she was up to, it was not going according to plan. Geraldine tells investigators that she was so disturbed by how Ciera was reacting that it made her nervous for her son. So much so, she tells him, you know what? The next time Ciera starts a fight with you, record it on your phone. Well, a light bulb goes off over investigators' heads because they remember, OMG, we've got a cell phone in evidence. It must be Rahim's. Except, when they go to access the phone, it's password protected, and none of their usual tools are cracking it open. Desperate, investigators knock on one more door to get into that cell phone. They call Ciera and say, we're about to close the case, but we just need to check out Rahim's cell phone. Do you happen to have the password? She does, and she gives it to them. And this is where Ciera's completely ridiculous story crumbles into dust. Because as it turns out, there were 4 videos saved to Rahim's phone, and they're of his murder. The first video clocks in at 10:27, less than 1 minute after Elise Jones exited stage left at 10:26. The video shows Rahim's face is drenched in blood, and he says to the camera, quote, y'all see this? This is what this biatch did to me. Rahim then looks at the camera and says, Ciera Harp did this to me. Ciera can be heard screaming in the background, and then a gunshot. It hits the bathroom mirror. A second gunshot rings out. Rahim falls to the ground. The phone also falls face up on the ground, still recording. Ciera comes into the frame, screaming, totally bonkers, complete cuckoo clock, screeching about how Rahim beats her, that she has been his victim for 4 years, how horribly he's treated her. And then she says, quote, I don't give a F what happens to you. As investigators continue watching the videos, they see that Ciera has not been stabbed during the fight with Rahim, that she is perfectly intact, suggesting that the injuries that landed her in the hospital happened after she had shot Rahim, as in she stabbed herself. Still, we're still in the first video and Rahim is on the ground. He's asking for water. He's asking if he can hug Angel. The video stops. The second video shows a still, ranting and raving Ciera. By now, she has blood all over her face. Rahim is still on the ground. In perhaps the most chilling and incomprehensible moment of this second video, well, really all of them, all four of them, but is Rahim realizing that this is the end, and he asks again to hug his daughter Angel. Ciera says, quote, "You can crawl to her, MFer." Ciera then shoots Rahim twice, and that's where the second video ends. And there are still 2 more videos. Holy hell. In the third video, a distraught Angel can be heard in the background crying for her daddy. Investigator John Gossart tells Snapped he believes this moment, quote, was the final one that really put Ciera over the top. And it's at this point that Ciera shoots Rahim again, this time in the top of his head. By the time Ciera delivered that final shot, it was clear Rahim wasn't going to come after her. He wasn't going to attack her. She was not in any danger. But that did not stop her from killing him. As Tom Jones of WSB TV in Atlanta told Snapped, quote, "It was real, it was horrific, it was horrible." Prosecutor John Fowler tells Snapped that watching the videos provided a revelation, saying, quote, "That no longer is this the normal behavior of a domestic abuse victim. This is manipulative behavior of a murderer." In other words, there is nothing on any of the videos that says self-defense. What they say is that Ciera is getting arrested for murdering Rahim. And indeed, she is arrested on February 22nd, 2018, and charged with 6 counts of malice murder and aggravated assault. Her trial starts in May of 2019, and prosecutors have to tread carefully because Ciera's defense is that she was a long-time victim of domestic violence, that Rahim was beating her, that she was scared for her life, hence, she killed him in self-defense. Investigator John Gossart told Snapped it was especially important to convey to the community that, quote, "Ciera Harp was not a victim in this case. Rahim Grant was the victim." Investigators believe that as soon as Elise Jones left the apartment, Ciera flew into a rage and attacked Rahim with her ever-present serrated knife, and that's when he went into the bathroom with his phone and started recording. Once she realizes what he's doing, she goes from 10 to 20, grabs at his gun, and she starts shooting him. A key piece of the defense case is that in the videos, remember, Ciera is screaming that Rahim was always abusing her, beating her up, that she was always at his mercy. And if you didn't know any better, it might sound convincing. Except Rahim's mother, Geraldine, who was privy to much about the relationship between Ciera and her son, tells Snapped that Ciera was an incredibly calculating person and that, quote, "Ciera was never crazy. She was always a person who thought out carefully what she did." And remember, she essentially recorded herself on Rahim's phone, screaming about how he'd been physically abusing her before she killed him. And then she gave police the password to Rahim's phone, I think because she thought that they would find those videos and that she could fool everyone into thinking that she had killed Rahim in self-defense. Prosecutor John Fowler says in Snapped, quote, "Everything she did was logical. She was logical in that she stabbed herself afterward to try to make it look like self-defense. In her mind, this rant that she goes on in the video is going to further show the investigators how much of a victim she was." As Geraldine succinctly told Snapped, quote, "She just thought she could outsmart the system." The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported Ciera's mother, Adrienne Thurmond, had testified during her trial that her daughter was manipulative, connived her way through life, and, quote, "reveled in disrespect and foolishness." WSB TV reported that in response to her mother's testimony, Ciera, quote, "sneered at her mother and mouthed a profanity and called her a female dog after she ripped into her." Ciera's self-defense defense convinces no one, and she is convicted on all 6 counts of malice murder and aggravated assault. Before Ciera received her sentence, her mother, Adrienne, asked the judge to sentence her daughter to life in prison, no chance of parole. As reported by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Ciera's mother made another bombshell request of the judge saying, quote, "We, the family, ask the court to sterilize Ciera Harp to prevent any more children being born." Wow. Her mother said, "End that bloodline right here." Man. Ciera herself took the stand and apologized to Geraldine, blaming it all on the alcohol, saying, quote, "Had I not been drunk, it never would have happened. Ciera was sentenced to 125 years behind bars. She is serving her sentence at Pulaski State Prison, and the earliest that she can be released is February of 2143, which is 120 years from now. Rahim's mother, Geraldine, is raising Angel. If you or someone you know needs domestic violence support, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at 800-799-7233. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of The Dark Side of Love. I am your host, Bianca Sloan, and show your love for The Dark Side of Love by visiting thedarksideoflove.com for show notes and transcripts. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to be notified about new episodes. You can also find a link to my Patreon page where you can access bonus material and other fun stuff. Learn more about my suspense novels about the dark side of love by visiting biancasloan.com. Thanks for hanging out with me, and join me next time for another tale of love gone wrong. I'll see you on the dark side.